Yeah, thank you very much for making the time to join us this evening. I really, really appreciate it. There's a few people I want to thank. First of all, our sponsor for the evening, Megaport, who are awesome. So say thank you. It wouldn't be possible without them. To the Victory officers who provide the best working spaces in the country, and also co-sponsor this event with us. Thank you so much. And last but not least, all of the people who rocked up, because it wouldn't be an event without you. So thank you so much. So obviously this session is around how to deliver cost-effective migrations. We're going to talk a little bit about how the migration enables that journey and the partnership that we have with Megaport and how they help us live up to our promise of delivering 40% faster migrations than anyone else in the market, which is financial back guarantee. In many cases, it's a lot more than that, and we'll show you that, and people like Megaport make those statements really easy for us with their great technology. So a little bit about us, founded in January last year in the key locations in Australia, and we're about 3 weeks away from launching our UK office, which is very, very cool, and hopefully with a little bit of help of my new partners in the corner there from Alien Vault, we'll be looking at Jakarta soon, apparently, so that's exciting. And yeah, up to 35 people, but the business is really the success of the people. People like Ivan, Sebastian, Sari, Ravi, all the rest. So yeah, thank you very much for helping me create this organization. So what do we stand for? Two core visions, ultimately to simplify every infrastructure, application, and data migration. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. But most importantly, we want to help our customers reduce their costs and increase their revenue. And I know that sounds like a broad, wishy-washy statement, but we take it really, really seriously. And the example I'd like to talk about in terms of how we live up to that vision is really around this example. I think everybody has probably heard of MYOB and knows that about 2 years ago, they were the #1 kind of accounting system in their field or in their market segment. And out of nowhere, Xero came along and just took over in a 2-year period. And we have to look at that story and ask ourselves why. I believe every success is 50% luck and 50% hard work. And they got lucky because they were born in the cloud, in this world where they had access to agile development methods, agile business methods, ways of deploying and creating, which were much faster than what traditional IT and platforms and systems and approaches could provide. And that's really where we come in as an organization, is we want to help our customers stay ahead of the curve. If they are the lucky ones, then we want to help them carve up and capture new markets and clients. And if they need to go through change, then we want to help them go through that change as seamlessly and as painlessly as possible. So, and in many cases, change in our area of the industry is coupled to a transformation from a platform or a technology perspective. So things like change management and business agility capabilities, program management, all of the things around the technology piece, end user adoption and training are core to what we do as an organization in enabling the technology change. So it's important for us to understand that. The other thing that's important to understand is the validation in the market is there. We're all using some kind of cloud technology on a personal level, on an organizational level, every single day of our lives. And enabling that and being on the curve is obviously at the forefront. So I mentioned our 40% faster guarantee, and that's something that we strive for when we work with our clients. But it's not just about how fast you can do it, it's about making sure that we keep our clients out of the news. Working with organizations like Victorian Funds Management Corporation, who manage $80 billion worth of Victorian government funds. The first meeting that I had with them, they basically said, yeah, the most important thing for us is to stay out of the news. So that actually took me 18 months to sell into that client to convince them that we would not let that happen. So ultimately, it's about trust as well. It's easy. It's Halloween. Yeah, and making that experience as easy as possible for our customers. 4 key capabilities, talking about our cloud discovery scenario. This is really what sets up that journey for our clients in terms of being able to transform them and doing it in a risk-free manner. A good example was a client up in Sydney where we ran a discovery engagement. We basically produced a 65-page discovery report which outlined every single consideration that you could fathom and gave them the roadmap and the strategy for that change. And that's not just from a technology perspective, it's all the softer pieces around that as well. That enables the actual migration. And then when we get there, helping them with training or hypercare or adopting that new technology and making it work for their organization. Simple examples, working with a mining-related explosives company around building a solution that can contain and capture IoT sensor and drone data from mines and bring that data in and allow them to make smarter decisions that they can then sell as a service back to their clients so that they can get the most out of those explosives. And that's, having that kind of end-to-end piece there. Security in those cases is obviously very important. When you're having one platform, software as a service or a cloud-based platform that has multiple different organizational people's data on the same platform, you have to make sure that the data that's being put there is only accessed by the people that's putting it there. And security is one of those things that we come up as, I guess, because of the time, a cloud-focused company. That's one of the biggest things that we always come up against. But having good capabilities through partners and skill sets helps organizations make those decisions and avoid the MIOB zero scenario. So it's our job to help our customers select the right tools. And that's why I think if you look at our websites and you look at our partners, you'll see that we've selected, in our opinion, what are the best in the industry in their individual capabilities. So we're talking about the leaders in their space and applying that to a process which many organizations out there will tell you they do. A lot of companies will say, yeah, we're migration experts, we can do that. But they haven't really thought about it in the way that I believe we have. And that's by looking at those technologies and applying them to the migration process. So on top of those core services, we have morphed really into what I would call a data management organization. We are heavily involved in customer data from a migration perspective, but once we get them there, they are constantly looking at how we can help them exploit or leverage or enhance their organization. Another example, Bupa, who I'm not sure if you've all seen, were in the news recently around their aged care business. And we believe that that is a result of an organization not having adequate and streamlined access to information to make good decisions. So we're building, with my man Sebastian over there, a product called Lightning Flow internally, which is a 4-part solution around data capture. So how do we help companies like Bupa capture information? How do we then transport that information in what is a very, very difficult scenario, regional locations, for example, where they have aged care facilities with no internet or very limited internet. How do we actually get that data from the bedside table or the aged care facility back to the head office to allow them to make smart business decisions? And that's the process that we apply through capabilities like this to help our customers stay where they should be. So that's around the migration jump spots. And ultimately, and our migration factories. And this is how we achieve those 50% faster, or 40% faster guarantees, is really around small things like, for example, we have all our migration environments pre-built in our own AWS, Azure, or Google environment. What does that mean for the clients? Well, we don't have to go to them and say, hey, we need this infrastructure, then we need to install migration tools, and then we have to connect it to your environment, and then we can do a migration. We just say, oh, you want to do a file share to SharePoint as an example. Well, we'll spin up that server in our environment, connect it up, and away we go. So really just taking out the unnecessary for the client and introducing efficiencies. So I just wanted to close off with a customer example where we clearly achieved a lot more than 40% through our discovery process, which was a combination of business workshops, understanding what the customer is actually trying to achieve from a business outcome perspective. How can we help them enhance what they're doing? Small things that create pain points. Their current solution in that case wouldn't allow them to do accurate geolocation calendar scheduling. Small thing, but what it meant was that their people were missing meetings with clients, which then becomes a really big thing. So they actually employed people to manually verify calendar scheduling. So the business case becomes quite tangible on a very, very small thing if you actually understand what the problem is. And that's when it becomes really easy to justify a change. So we did a thorough discovery and understanding from a technology perspective as well as a business perspective, and we came up with a solution and a strategy and a migration roadmap which reduced what they were looking at doing from 3,000 days to 112, which I think is pretty significant because no one's going to do a migration that takes 3,000 days because by the time you finish it's going to be something else. So so making things real and bringing us onto the connectivity part in any migration, especially when you're looking at cloud technology, is very, very important for us. And that's why we're so proud to be partners with Megaport, because they take a lot of pain out of the process. I'm not going to steal too much of your thunder. But having to not implement all your own infrastructure in a data center somewhere, and then creating connectivity on top of that. 59-second provisioning, which is, when you look at potentially getting something like an express route, 6 months with Telstra as an example. Being able, So thank you very much for helping us live up to our promises to our clients. And with that, I'll hand over.
Yes, sir. Cheers, all. That was a great intro. I like that news article was from July. So how time flies when you're having fun. So I'm here with a couple of colleagues tonight. Hopefully a few of you have had a chance to have a chat with them already. So couldn't have done it without you, Simon. Steve is at the back. I might as well go through to the names. And Jordan, where are you? Jordan? There you are, hiding, not in uniform. What's going on here? So if you haven't had an opportunity to have a chat with them, certainly have a bit of a ping to them. I want to thank Steve, who's done the prior two of these workshops in Brisbane and Sydney. So we saved the best for last, as they say. Obviously, Ru's hometown with Melbourne. So really appreciate you turning up. I think we'll just get into it. Not waiting on anyone. So you're all here, obviously, because of the meetup, and obviously you've got an association with the meetup and the migration company. Who of you have heard of Megaport before tonight? Just now? Okay, all right. That's good, that sets the scene. So we can talk about migrations and where Megaport come into the picture. Sorry? Excellent. Oh, you got invited today. Thank you for coming along. Yeah, we may as well, have our customers join in, so very much appreciated. I need to put Toll on the slide. You've identified now. So in terms of our customers, so what do Megaport do? We look after high-speed connectivity between data centers, and in fact through data centers to cloud. We're not an internet service provider, although one of our products, I won't talk about it tonight in great deal, is called Internet Exchange, which actually provides effectively, I want to plug into cloud at a very, very high speed, up to 10 gigabits per second, or even multiples of that. So, we're not talking your general NBN style connections here. What we find when it comes to migrations, however, is that the rationale behind customers who are going to be doing migrations to cloud are that they want to minimize the downtime for any of those, database loads or, say, an email server or something that's migrating across into cloud needs to happen as fast as possible. Problem is, telco is not a great model to connect to that in a lot of sense. So what we provide, you'll notice here in this, and I'll go through some of them, is a scalable product that is essentially a bit more of a network as a service type model. So our contract lengths are very, very short as compared to telcos, which could be multiples of years as well. And in terms of the cloud offerings, it's probably easier to list clouds that we don't work with, certainly the top three with Azure, AWS, and Google. And I know, Ru, you've said the proficiency is certainly around those three, but there's probably about another 10 in the stable as well that we routinely connect to. So I wanted to take you through a bit of a brief overview. I won't talk for too long because I have a demo, and hopefully after the power outage, the demo will still work. Halloween! Well, let's kick into it. So I like to start by getting rid of any buzzword bingo. We do, not great resolution there. We do use the terms, or if you've heard the terms SDN, or a software-defined network, if I go into a room full of techies, I'm going to get about half the room who go, yes, I know exactly what that is, and the other half of the room sort of stare at me and go, what are you smoking? I don't understand this. So I like to set the tone and say exactly what it is that we say that we do. If you see the socks, I do have some questions at the end. The joke is that we call our network a fabric, and because of its elasticity, as in we can add and remove connections and speed them up and down, it is elastic fabric. So that's the reason for the socks, if you see that. So we call it a fabric, and obviously with the amount of partners that we have on board, partners can be customers or providers. So it's not just limited to those major public cloud providers as well. It's anyone who actually brings to our network a resource. It might be a storage service, it might be a Nutanix box, it might be something that's in the hyperconverged space where they say we are missing an element, and that element is connectivity. And it's not just about Australia, it's not just about New Zealand. I look after the APAC area in particular, but certainly we extend worldwide, so primarily in US and Europe outside of the APAC area, but into Hong Kong and Singapore. So, go to the definition. We supply elastic bandwidth, so scale up or down, for internet peering and virtual connections. So the idea that we will use tonight is actually called a VXC, a virtual cross-connect, different to a physical cross-connect, which is effectively a piece of fiber or something like that in a data center. So we'll go through a bit of the model differentiation between traditional connectivity and what Megaport provide. I'm not going to beat up too much. Everyone's probably had a Telstra, oh, did I say the name? Telco experience. Was that the one that took how many weeks, was it, Ru, before? And in terms of dealing with telco providers, what we generally see is the difficulty is about that. Okay, it takes a long time to get a contract negotiated, and that contract is for a period of years generally, and it's an expensive setup cost, so the one-time fees are high, but then you're also looking at 3-5-year rolling contracts. So we're very much into the no setup fee. We do need a physical cross-connect if you're actually plugging into us at one of the data centers that we're at, and there's quite a large number of those. I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. But the setup cost is quite limited. It's that single physical fiber, that's the physical cross-connect, and then everything else across that is the virtual cross-connect. So you can turn those on or off as you need, and there's not a setup cost for each of those. You basically pay as you use them. In terms of our provisioning, well, yes, our side is about 60 seconds to do the provisioning. Hopefully we'll show that tonight. I was doing some tests with AWS. The AWS people aren't in the room yet. Unfortunately, AWS is taking a bit longer, depending on where the workloads are on the network side. Sometimes it can take more than a few minutes. So given the time I have allocated for the demo, we'll at least show the start of that. But you'll certainly see the Megaport component going through in about a minute. When we talk about capacity, the other thing we see with telco models is it's very hard to say, at this particular point in time, I'm happy with a couple of 100 megabits per second of bandwidth, but I need to go to 5, 10 gigabits per second of bandwidth on a Friday night, for example, when I've got my migration window. And that's one of the key reasons the migration company have partnered with us, because it allows customers to burst up to that speed, and then we're done with that, to wind that back down. And that's not just within data centers, Melbourne to Melbourne or Melbourne to Sydney. That could be Melbourne to LA. It could be Melbourne to Singapore. And in fact, the demo I'll be showing tonight is Melbourne to Singapore for that very reason. Very, very neutral, one-stop shop. We connect to a lot of providers. All you need to do to be a provider on our network is have a Megaport, so to be connected into that ecosystem. This here is a bit of a, well, it's a bit of an eye chart with the diagram. This is a pricing tool that we use to give you an idea of what the costs look like across our network. So I'll actually go to the live one, I think is best. So the URL is pricing.megaport.com. It does ask for an email. You'll note this is not a valid one, but certainly we'd prefer if you gave us a real live one. And then we're going to ask not necessarily for the data center locations, but we'll ask for where is the from and where is the to. So in the case of the example tonight, we're actually going to be connecting in Melbourne, an Azure location here in Melbourne, to Singapore. So I can simply start typing, and we can see the metro comes up there. In terms of where we are, and I'll touch on this in a little bit, we're at 528 data centers globally. If you know of a data center that you're at or that you're near, you can easily drill down into those particular locations. So we'll go here into Melbourne and see where those data centers are. Or you can even get a list. Let's just type it there. Get a list of those locations. Because some people know certain data centers by different names, but generally the street address is somewhat unique. Anyway, back to pricing tool. So we have a choice of currencies as well. I can get presented here. It will be the local currency. Obviously, being in Australia as the A end, I'm seeing in Melbourne, I'm seeing Australian dollars. But if I wish to, if I've got multiple ports worldwide, I can actually convert that to a single flat currency and just select USD. So this is what it looks like. You saw it on the fixed PowerPoint before. This is a month. So a connection, this is the virtual circuit across the month between Melbourne and Singapore. I can slide this up or down, and you can do this without logging in, as I say. So if I want 100 megabits per second, and I want it for that entire month, that cost there is reflected there. So 28 days, being the month period, price $852. However, when a migration comes on board, you don't want to be limited to that 100 megabit per second connection. In this case, I've actually chosen a physical port speed of 1 gigabit per second, which is an option that we have, or also a 10 gigabit per second option. That will allow you to go higher. But for the purposes of the demo, let's just say on this Friday, so if a week into that month, we're going to need to burst that speed higher. So if we go and start raising the bar, so to speak, let's take it all the way up to 1 gigabit per second. So that's the maximum throughput that that physical connection will allow us. Zoom out a little bit. And we can see there that the estimate over that month doesn't go much higher than that nearly $1,000 for that 100 megabits per second, even though we're now getting 24 hours at that gigabit per second speed. Now, not all migrations go to plan. I know it's the best laid plans. But what you can do here is simply slide that outwards, and you can see that at the granularity, we're actually moving hour by hour. So this gives you a good cost estimate to get an idea of what it's going to cost to run that migration, best case and worst case. But obviously, you're only going to pay for the time that you're actually at that speed or when you're using that speed. Even if something doesn't quite work with the migration, I know, Rue, I know your migrations work first time every time. But if you did need to roll back, no one's ever rolled back in the history of doing these things. You'd simply say, all right, that's okay. Let's squeeze that one back. We're going to do it again the next day. So we can put another window in there. So it's quite easy to see that it's a flexible model. Will account for that speed. Will give you that limit that you need when you need it. But you can move on and say, look, not everything is going to work that way first time, or it might take a bit longer, or even if it's shorter, you're only paying for that dimensioning as required. As I mentioned, connected to 528, I've got 520 plus there, just, keep the slide current, right? I keep throwing on sites, and I can't try and keep slides up to date. That's our network. This is not riding on the internet. This is riding on private capacity. So this is capacity that Megaport has sourced, and generally diverse capacity. I won't be able to drill into those specific ones. I'll show you in Australia and New Zealand. But for our locations across the Tasman there into Auckland and Wellington, even if you say, I want that 100 megabits per second or I want that gigabit per second, what happens, once again, worst case scenario, someone puts something through one of those fibers, the Megaport network for that cost will automatically protect that. We'll find another route for you. So there's a diverse amount of connections in the network, and you don't need to build two of everything. If you build it once, know that there is a protection path there. In the case that we're showing tonight from Melbourne to Singapore, you can see that there's a path via Perth, and there's also a path via Sydney up through Hong Kong. So it might be slightly different latency, but we'll give you what you've paid for and let you get through with that work. And that's very key when you're starting to build out those migrations. Australia and New Zealand, as we said, Two diverse paths here. We've got the paths to the US on 2 different cable systems as well, and then diverse paths out both to Perth and beyond, including a submarine path between Sydney and Perth, which is quite new. So it gives a lot of flexibility and capacity there. And you get access to all of that simply by saying that A end, where am I coming from, and where am I going to in the B end. All right, so I spoke about what does it take to get connected. Thank you, Steve, for this slide. I love the little man plugging it in, or little person. I can't say a man, it's a gender non-specific figure, in the best case. That is one of the fibre cables, so we only speak fibre. So it's called a single mode fibre. You've even done the right one. So the yellow cable is right within a data centre. If you're not in a data centre, but you're near one, it is possible to get connected to Megaport. Obviously, we host our physical equipment in these sorts of racks. Why? Because, well, they're generally well cared for in data centres. You know, they've got good power that doesn't switch off at 6:08 p.m. Sorry, guys. But obviously, they're temperature control. They've got UPSs. They're very, very secure facilities. But if you do wish to get access to a Megaport and you don't physically have kit in a data centre, have a chat with us, find one of the crew, and we can look at data centre presences that will actually let you bring a physical fibre in. So most of the reason I picked out that yellow cable is it's actually good for 10 kilometre run without any amplification. So there's ways to get these connections running. So here's the customer network. There's a device that they're using. The fibre, whether it be just a short patch cable or whether it be a data centre connection, is coming in there, and it's plugging into one of those Megaports. So I mentioned there it's a 1 or a 10 gigabit per second presentation. From there, we can connect to any of these cloud providers, or in fact, a different data centre across the city, different states, or across the world. It's still going to be that very, very fast provisioning time. So here's the models. Data centre to data centre, simply going from one Megaport to another. Cloud connectivity, so we're connecting here from one of those data centres. You don't need to buy another port. We've already done all the hard work and the wiring for the cloud providers. And I'll show you very, very shortly on our portal as well. We've written a lot of integrations. So what you'll see is actually the hard work is kind of hidden. We present them on our portal, simply point, click, provide as little detail as we need to make that connection live. And in about that 59-second time frame, we should see that happen as well. I will touch on a new product that we launched early last year, and we've relaunched this year on some new hardware, which is called Megaport Cloud Router, which is also very, very key for some migrations, because we're talking a lot of cases here about people with physical routers, switches, hardware at data centers and want to migrate off those. That's certainly one case. But another use case that we see quite commonly is users who are migrating simply from one cloud to another. Now, it seems quite simple. You say, I'm on Azure and I want to go to AWS, or the other way around. Is it a one-time hit? Is it I want to escape everything out and put it in the opposition cloud? Or is it a bit of pick and choose? Is it that I want to use some services in cloud A and some services in cloud B? The reality is it's a little bit of everything. So what we've found and what we've brought online is this capability where Megaport can actually host the routing capability. We call it MCR, or Megaport Cloud Router. And you don't need a physical port. You don't need to plug into us if you simply wish to connect 2 locations on our network together. Won't go into a great demonstration on that tonight, but certainly if you had a need to drive services, say, from AWS into Azure, or vice versa, it's certainly possible to do so. You don't need to worry about that physical connection. You can do all of that in a few minutes. So just a matter of multiples of those 59-second deployments. If you do have a physical port and you want to take advantage and you want to, ride that price arbitrage, you want to take some services, my database is cheaper over here, my storage is cheaper over there, you can certainly go from that physical data center and put a virtual cross-connect into that MCR as well. We support up to 25 different connections on that, 100 on the physical port, so it certainly allows a lot of different ways to connect. And that then takes us to the last one, which is the multi-cloud connectivity. So we've actually gone up to the full stack model there. We've deployed quite a lot of MCRs around. Certainly when we booted up early last year, there were only a couple, Sydney and Melbourne, were the initial locations. We've brought on, there were 2 locations in Sydney for diversity at the start. We brought on a second location here in Melbourne. We've got Brisbane and Perth locally. We've also bought New Zealand and some other sites. I'll put a little highlight under this one. So Japan has been of great interest for customers in Australia, certainly those who are using Salesforce. There's a lot of the resident tenancies that are located in the APAC area that are in Japan, and we've got that coming online at the end of this month. So looking forward to having that built as well. All right, have I tied you with slides? You want a demo? All right, let's try this. So, I'll take you out to the portal first, and I'll just log out, make sure everything is running happily, because I've been talking for too long. So, the portal is, and you can actually register yourself, portal.megaport.com. You can see a little button down the bottom right there that says register now. We won't ask too many details. Here's one I've prepared earlier. And I just want to take you through what we're actually setting up tonight. So as I mentioned, I have a device located in one of our data centers in Singapore. I'll just zoom into that. So we can see we have a router. It could be a layer 3 switch, but in this case it's a router. It's plugged into a data center at SG1, it's called, Equinix Data Center in Singapore. And in that I have a connection to AWS and a connection to Azure, and I'm going to build those out just to show those in real time. I'm going to leave the Azure one built because it's already one that I've started, but I'm not routing traffic across it just yet. And to prove that, I'll just drop out here into my wonderful remote desktop, and I'll just check that that ping is not working. So before state, we shouldn't have any response. So that machine's not talking to me, we'll bring it online. So what I need to do is to jump into the Azure portal. Who's got an Azure tenancy or run an express route before? A couple of nods, okay. So if you haven't built an express route before, let's have a look at that very briefly. To build a new one, I won't actually go through the full setup process. I'll show you the steps involved. Simply with ExpressRoute, you can say, I want to add a new connection, and they keep rebooting the portal. It's the one constant thing with cloud is change. And I'll call this something useful, TMC Demo 2. And we can then choose the providers. And the providers are important. Obviously, we want to pick Megaport in this case, because it will define where we can meet the Microsoft network. And that's in the next stage, which is peering location. I've chosen Singapore there. I might choose Melbourne, for example. Just depends on where your tenancy is and where you want to connect to our network. Bandwidth here, there are individual increments from 50 megabits per second up to 10 gigabits per second. It is possible with ExpressRoute to burst up, so you can go from 50 megs to 200, 500. They do make it a bit harder to step back. Some would say impossible, but really it's just another 59-second deploy. Stepping up is only a matter of minutes to rebuild that circuit, to redeploy that circuit. To go backwards, you simply build a new circuit at that lower speed. So I'll just do a 50 meg one for the demo. These two filters here, standard and premium, define whether I'm on the Microsoft network just going to get access to the local routing domain. So if I pick Melbourne, I can route between Melbourne and Sydney. If I pick premium, I can actually route to any of the Microsoft locations worldwide on their backbone. And a lot of cloud providers will have their own backbones as well. So depending on which data centers you want to go to or from, those providers may not be in all of the data centers that we're at, or it might be in a different data center, depending on how you're connecting to us. So I'm going to choose standard and a metered billing model and simply put that in and say create. And that will go off and build me an express route. Luckily, as I said before, I've already done one. What I haven't done is I haven't connected it through. So you've seen that before because my ping wasn't working. I'll just go back to that. It's good, still not working. Let's go and do something that'll make it work. So here's my gateway. I've already got it running. It's connected through our portal. To show on our side how that ExpressRoute key would be ordered, I'll do that first. So we'll go back, ExpressRoute. So once I've actually accepted that, I would be given what's called a service key. It looks like something like that. So I'd simply copy that. And this is where the APIs come into play. If I say I want to add that to a Megaport connection, I can simply click on cloud, and then I get asked which cloud providers am I interested in connecting to. So you get a list here. Obviously, I mentioned the top 3 before. AWS, we share 39 ports with, ExpressRoute, 116 ports globally, and Google, we also see their IBM, Nutanix, Oracle, Salesforce. So they're the major ones that we'll see. And these are ones that we have some degree of API integration. What does that mean? It means it'll actually take over without sitting in someone's inbox, waiting for them to come back from leave. So Azure ExpressRoute, and it'll ask me for that key, and I can paste that key in there. What we then go and do is query the Microsoft database and say, where does that exist? So in about a minute's time, we should get that response back, and that particular one that I've used is in Singapore. I've already connected to it once, so you can see there's 2 separate locations there. And that gives me a way to build high availability and redundancy if I need to. So as I mentioned, I'm not going to wait for that to build. I've actually got one that's running. I'm going to connect that here. So we'll say home, back to my gateway. I already have my virtual machine running. We saw that before, and I'll add that as a connection. I'll say express route. Let's choose a circuit. There's my demo. Okay. Now that will take about a minute to connect, but after that's connected, I should see that contact test, that ping from my virtual machine, allowing that traffic through. I didn't, as I say, do the whole connection there. I've set up, I've requested an express route. I haven't shown you the configuring the routing because that one was already connected. But on the AWS side, we can now proceed and connect the other end. So this is a typical example of a customer who wanted to do a migration between those two clouds. All right, so let's do that. Back to the portal. Instead of Azure this time, I'm going to pick AWS instead. So cloud, back to AWS. And now I'm presented with all of the AWS locations worldwide. So I can actually route from that across the Megaport network anywhere that I want to go globally. Or I can say, look, I'm happy to stay within that same metro. I'm going to choose Singapore. So my VM is actually, my Microsoft VM is actually in Melbourne, but my AWS side is in Singapore. I'm building this across those two networks. So I can pick either of those locations, or if I want diversity, and this is the reason we built 2 of those MCRs in each of the geographies, is to give us that high availability. Build 2 of everything, no single point of failure. We can proceed in there and say, okay, Singapore was good. Migration demo. And this is where I get to pick my speed. I can see that I'm limited. I've got a 1 gig port here, so maximum is 1,000 megabits per second. I'm happy with 50 megabits per second. I don't get that same granularity of 50, 100, 200. I can choose 55 if I wanted to. And what we'll actually do is we'll calculate that price in real time. Because this is a connection from a Singapore port into Singapore, I can actually go all the way up to 1,000 megabits per second. So that whole gigabit per second over that month is 100 Singapore dollars. If I'm only to use that for a week, it's going to be $25. So it's that table coming into play again. I've assigned a VLAN because I've already got some of this configured. It'll go off and check, and I get a little verification there. Yep, that's good to go. Now, AWS is slightly different to Azure, whereas in Azure I had to configure a lot of those details up front within the Azure portal. In AWS, we actually send them the data. It's different. You can leave all of those fields there blank if you want and let AWS decide for you. You then configure them on your own. Because I already have them pre-configured, I can tell it what to use. So hopefully our friends from Toll have done this a couple of times as well. Not necessarily for AWS, not going to tell you what they're using. But as I said there, I'm now building out a 1 gigabit per second connection at that monthly rate, $100. So what does that look like? This is the provisioning side from our component. I've simply added that to a shopping cart. Hopefully those here have bought things on the internet before. And click order. So whilst that goes off, what it's actually doing now is validating to make sure we have all of those resources in line, that everything checks out, it looks good. So I'll say order now. All right, so here's where I tap dance for 59 seconds. No kidding. So who's done, I asked the question about Azure before, who's done a direct connect or is using AWS? Okay, a few less, that's good. I noticed all the Megaport people have done. Have to filter you out. So AWS is slightly different. I wish I had the AWS people in the room. The service, instead of ExpressRoute, is called Direct Connect. We actually land in as what's called the virtual interface. So you can see here I'm filtering for something called MIG, for migration demo. So that will come through in about that minute's time. What I'm going to do is connect my host. My virtual machine in AWS is called EC2. It resides in a virtual private compute network, which is a VPC. It's just a subnet. And then I'll connect that through Direct Connect into that router. So hopefully that'll come live very shortly. I won't sit there hitting refresh. What I will do is go over to my remote desktop with Microsoft and make sure that we're now able to connect to that host. And we are. So that's good. What I'm actually seeing there is a response time there, just about 89 milliseconds. So that's the round trip time between my host, which is here in Melbourne, going out to Singapore and hitting that physical box that's installed in that data center in Equinix. Whilst I've been tap dancing, we can see that connection came live there for a second, still thinking about it. If I want to, I can actually go back to the Megaport side and view this in real time, we can see now that it's building out that connection. And when that little rocket ship stops flying, shirts, that will be ready to connect. Even better, if I step through, I can sort of see what's the status. So I can see that it's actually assigned me a virtual interface. So some of those details are the ones that I provided, and some of them are actually coming back from AWS automatically. Let me just reload that. There we go. There's my demo. And that number there, 668RF, should match the one that's in here. So that's actually gone and provisioned it straight into AWS. Now it's missing one step. If I actually click on that, it'll say that it's sitting in a status of confirming. As a customer, I don't need to give Megaport any credentials. I don't need to give you a username or a login or anything like that. What I need to do is have a user who can do it on that behalf and say, actually, that is me, that is valid, that is something we requested. It might be a different team looking after cloud that's looking after network. And all they need to do is click on accept and select the right network. So in this case, I've got a migration demo connection. And I'll accept that in, and now my traffic will be flowing also between AWS and that port in Singapore, and I'm able to route now from my Microsoft instance to do my migration. Or if I was running this through a physical host and I wanted to bring up that multi-cloud connectivity, I might leave it in situ. Or if I was using an MCR, I actually have it without physically having a presence in the data center. It is possible, I mentioned the locations page before. Whilst there's 528 data centers, you don't need to worry about, if you're just using an MCR for migrations, you don't need to worry about being in one of those data centers. If you look at the table there, if you say, well, I'm interested in, my clouds are in Melbourne and Sydney, for example, I could put an MCR in Melbourne or Sydney. It's kind of equidistant between the two. And when you look at these locations, anything with a tick is a location that we have an MCR available. So if I go back into our portal, what does that look like? Instead of buying a new port, I can simply say create MCR, and then I'll choose which country that locks down to. Let's choose one on Collins Street. Hey, we're on Collins Street, why not? And I can build out that MCR live. So what this is doing is it's effectively bringing online a new compute resource, not in cloud, it's in our own cloud effectively, that then can connect across our network to different clouds and form all of that work that I was doing there to set up those connections manually on my device. I can do that in cloud automatically. You can see that there's 4 different speeds there. So the top and the tail, the 1 gigabit per second and the 10 gigabit per second map to our physical ports, but we also have some intermediate steps as well. So that goes from $500 Australian per month for a 1 gigabit per second, up to $2,000 for a 10 gigabit per second, and there's some increments in between. So depending on how much traffic and what speed, maximum speed you need to see, mind you, those individual virtual circuits will be still prorated, will be still chargeable on a, as you use it basis. So same with the MCR. There's no minimum cost attached to this. If you use it for the week and you turn it off, it's really 1/4 of those prices. So I'll give it a name, something really creative. Meg. And we'll simply say, yes, that looks good to me, and order. And that builds all of that same capability with those, what we call integrations, the API lookups to do ExpressRoute, to do Azure, to do Google as well. We have a few others, as I mentioned. These are the cloud providers that we have the integrations to. Depends on what you're using. As I said before, it's not necessarily what you're using today. It might be something that you see that becomes available in the future, and you want to take advantage of that. Hopefully, either let us know or we're ahead of it already, but we can certainly make that connection for you. All right. I think did I say my prayers to the demo gods sufficiently? Hopefully that's actually done the right demos. Happy to take questions if there's any questions. If you want to grab a drink and ask questions, it's also acceptable. Rue, did you want to come up and spin some of the examples of how we've used this? By the way, good questions get socks.
I've got a question.
Real elastic fabric. Yes, mate.
What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Do I get a sock?
Only because you're wearing it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rue.
Any questions? No?
I think they just want to get to the
you've
beer.
done a good job. I think you've done a good job.
We'll be around anyway, so thank you very much for coming tonight. And
Awesome.
enjoy
Thank
some
you.
more. Thank you.